Welcome to the Painting of the Week podcast, where we look at some of the most significant paintings throughout history. Introducing your hosts, Phil Grabsky and Laura Bentham.
Salve. What, you say? Why has he said salve? Well, I'll explain. Because this week's Painting of the Week has a rather surprising choice. It is, and before I even tell you, let me remind you, if you go to the 7th-art.com website, press on podcast, you'll see the subject of this week's Painting of the Week, and also our YouTube channel. You can do the same. It is unusually for us, not a painting, but a statue. And it is a statue of Augustus. It's called Augustus Prima Porta, and it is at the Vatican, or in the Vatican museums. It is, I think, quite extraordinary, and there's no particular reason why we've chosen it to talk about, except that it is a great work of art, and there's lots to say about the statue, I think. Mm-hmm. I'm here, as always, with Laura. And I think Laura found this somewhat of a surprise when I said, let's do a statue this week.
It was a surprise, Phil. Only because, is this your favourite, would you say this is kind of your favourite part of history? One of those things that you have loved sort of all the way through? Is it one of those sort of interests?
That was brilliant, Laura, because just before we started, we talked about the fact that if someone asks you a question, and you're not quite sure the answer,
okay,
you immediately ask that person back
another
a question.
Well, the thing is...
No,
go on.
I'll answer your question.
Yeah, go on.
Do you know, the very first theatrical show that I was taken to by my school was Julius Caesar. And I absolutely loved it. I can remember it to this day, that dark auditorium and this extraordinary play and the language of Shakespeare. And I was probably must have been my secondary school, so I was probably 13 or 14. And not only did I fall in love with theatre and Shakespeare, but actually, because of that particular play, I fell in love with Roman history. I was also doing Latin at school, which I loved. I did a year of Latin, and something in me just really loved Roman history, and I've stuck with that. And I think one of the best series I ever made was a 6-part series for the BBC and A&E in the United States called I, Caesar, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. It was a 3-year project. It was every single day, because I also took it upon myself to write a book, and that Brilliant. Is actually writing a book's actually more work than making a TV series, because with the book you can't, there are no jumps, no gaps. You have to do everything, and you have to be so well researched and have a point, and you're treading where many have trodden before. But we also travelled around the Mediterranean, Mare Nostra, our sea, the Romans called it. We did 50,000 miles of travelling, and we filmed in so many Roman locations. And actually, that's where I fell in love with Roman statuary. I had this plan with the series that what we would do is, as often as possible, we would film the statues of the individuals that we were talking about.
Oh, right, okay.
And we were shooting on film, and we were shooting on high-resolution film. And I made it very difficult for my cameraman and camera assistant by saying we only shoot on what's known as 50 ASA film, which is it's very slow film, which means it's very high resolution. And in dark environments, you need a lot of light. You can't just, as you can with a phone now, the phone will automatically adjust, but it might become a bit grainy. Anyway, we've got this amazing footage, which we still have and still license out, even to this day. The hardest place to get into was the Vatican, and they have, over the years, been one of the most difficult locations for us to film in, and they have the most incredible collection. And this is one of those statues.
Yeah, okay. So I will answer your question.
Okay.
Because you, was it 2 days ago, said to me, Laura, we're going to do this. And sometimes I think at school, you're made to give up subjects too quickly. You know, when you have to take those options.
Yeah, definitely.
And suddenly you've got to do a choice between geography and history. So I think I went, I liked a bit of an Oxbow Lake. So we did, did geography.
Oxbow River.
Okay. Whatever.
That's all I remember from geography.
Yeah.
The Oxbow.
I don't know, it's because I used to do field trips. But anyway, it was fun and I loved all that. But it always makes me feel a little bit sad that I missed... you suddenly had to give up at those ages. It's crazy.
Do you know what I had to
give
give
up?
up?
Had a mix.
I remember at 14 having to give up German, which was a mistake on my part because I used to go to Germany because my sister lived there. I could have learned German properly. Art, which I loved. Woodwork, which I loved. Music, which I would have enjoyed.
Yeah.
And then we had to do maths and additional maths.
Yeah.
Additional maths. I remember saying to my head of year, I said, "This is completely pointless. I'm going to fail it at O level. I'm not interested. It's of no benefit to me in my future life." And I remember him saying, he said, "Grabsky, if you don't do additional maths, you'll be doing no O levels at all at this school." Now, at the end of the conversation, I used to sit at the back, doodling. I got a U, which means I'm not even sure I filled in the paper. I just turned up for the exam. Yeah. Complete waste of time.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, and actually what I'd said was, at that point, I'm 15, 16, I said, "I want to be a photographer. Let me go and work in the photographic darkroom."
And they did.
He said no.
Oh.
He said, "You've got to carry on with your additional maths."
Okay.
But the European system where you do 8 or 9 A levels maybe to a lesser degree, far more sensible.
But it's nicer, isn't it?
Yeah.
But then that's why I loved that you told me to have a look at this.
Yeah.
Because I have really no knowledge at all on the Roman Empire. Had a look at this. If I couldn't even maybe read, that whole statue is just telling the most incredible story.
Yeah.
And as you know, Phil, because you can see I have 6 pages of notes.
Yeah.
But I even had a conversation with someone yesterday about what I'd learned and about Augustus and things. And I thought, well, isn't that lovely? That you told me, "Laura, have a look at this statue." And in that statue, in all of his glory and all the lovely things that are on the plate and everything else, there's a story.
Well, first of all, so the other day I was driving around at Milton Keynes, which is a city in just north of London, and you cross something called, I think it's Watling Street.
Oh yeah.
And then you drive a bit further up and you cross it again. Anyway, Watling Street is an old, very straight Roman road that connected Kent coast through London, headed off towards the Welsh border.
Right.
I mean, it's just one example. You cannot understand us today and our history without understanding the Romans. There's so many different ways so many examples you can give of the influence of Roman history on us. I mean, one obvious one, of course, is if you go to somewhere like Washington, look at the buildings. They're just copies.
Yeah.
Of ancient Rome. You could go on and on. Augustus. So when I did my series on it's called I, Caesar. The book is available on Audible and Kindle, and the TV series is available at 7th-art.com, so you can watch it. What I decided to do is to break down the history of the Roman Empire into 6 biographies.
Right.
6 individuals. The first individual was Julius Caesar. Mm-hmm. Julius Caesar was not an emperor.
That I've just learnt. There you go.
When he died, was assassinated in the back room of the Theatre of Pompey. Not in the Senate House, as some people mistakenly think. He died without an heir. Now, in fact, the Roman Republic had rejected the idea of a monarchy and of kings. And they had a system whereby they had senators. And 2 senators would rule every year. And it would be a kind of a rolling system. Julius Caesar, and it's an amazing story in its own right, he basically became the sole ruler of Rome. Not everybody was happy about that, which is why he was assassinated. Didn't leave an heir. But he nominated his nephew, whose name was Octavian, and this is the person that we now know as Octavius. Augustus. Augustus became the first emperor. And the emperors are the most, I mean, it is the most extraordinary story. Now, Caesar looked at 6 of them. Well, Julius Caesar, not an emperor. First emperor, Augustus. And then I looked at Nero, who's not quite what we think, but still there was a lot of excess under his rule. You have to understand as well, ancient Rome had 1 million people.
Right.
So you imagine an ancient city with 1 million people, so they're having to feed them, water them. Here's an aside. This statue is called Augustus Prima Porta. Prima Porta is a suburb of Rome, and Rome was dependent on its aqueducts, bringing water from the nearby hills. They're amazing works of construction because they have to have a decline of just a tiny bit, but just so the water flows from the hills all the way down to the edges of Rome, into Rome, and basically coming out in taps and into the streets. And Prima Porta was where one of these aqueducts arrived, like the first gate. That's where, in something like 1863, they dug this statue up. Then I did Hadrian. Hadrian's fascinating because he was an emperor that travelled his empire. He spent most of his time travelling in Egypt and obviously in Britain and in France, and extraordinary man. Constantine, very important because he basically makes the Roman, or on his deathbed he takes on Christianity, and essentially the Roman Empire becomes Christian. You've also got Constantinople. The Roman Empire at this point is moving from Rome being its base to what we now call Istanbul. There is a moment when there are 4 emperors and there are more than one capital in it. Then Justinian. Justinian's quite late, and he's in Istanbul. Very interesting man. Okay. There is an argument, actually, that the Roman Empire never falls. It just becomes something else, and we're all just the inheritors of the Roman Empire. Okay. Augustus.
Maybe there's a statue to us all, Phil.
Statue to us all. But Augustus, exactly. So, first of all, it's a very, very beautiful work. I mean, before anything else, they're carving this out of a block of marble. It's possible that some of the, maybe, I don't know actually whether it is possible that it could be a separate piece of marble, the cloak that's then laid across it. But it's quite likely that it is one block of marble.
I mean, that in itself is unbelievable.
Staggering.
Yeah.
And we've talked
Just look at the folds of the fabric.
Unbelievable. And we've talked about this before, where painting is an additive art. So you're constantly adding. And in fact, we know plenty of examples where an artist gets fed up and scrapes it all off and starts again.
Right, yeah.
Sculpting is a reductive art. You start with a block and you're chipping away, and you have to visualise. You have to know what it is inside that block.
Yeah.
So you start with, you take quite big chunks away, and eventually you're taking tiny bits away. And imagine, I cannot actually really imagine how somebody does this.
I'd actually quite like to go and see someone do it. Because when you think about it, then you're saying is with the face, when you've got to mess his nose up.
Oh, yeah.
And you're done.
Oh, David is a great example. So David, which is one of the most famous statues of all time, wasn't started by Michelangelo. It was started by somebody else. They'd got a big block of marble from Carrara. And again, that's fascinating because you've got this mountain. This is why it's so distressing what we as humans are doing to each other, because the planet is so bountiful in what it gives us. There is this mountain in northwestern Italy which produces this beautiful white rock that we call marble, which is white. You can carve it, but it lasts for hundreds and hundreds of years. It doesn't just fall apart, doesn't flake away. It doesn't have kind of streaks of brown in it or streaks of black in it. It is pure white. I mean, it's the most amazing material. Michelangelo reputedly would go and live in some shed in the quarry for months until he found the right block. Anyway, this block in Florence, they wanted a statue carved, and a guy started it, and he started drilling holes and cutting bits off, and in the end he gave up.
Right, okay.
And it sat in a kind of just next to the cathedral for 20, 25 years. Michelangelo came along and said, I'll have a crack at this. Now, there's now a story which might not be true, but the story is that he figured the way that he could get David into this now distressed, half-worked block of marble was by carving him naked, and therefore he didn't have to do the clothes.
Oh, okay.
Maybe that's true.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not.
Yeah.
But he then creates this most extraordinary statue. Now the idea was that it was going to go on the cathedral roof in Florence, which is why it's so big. And also Michelangelo's thinking of people seeing it from the ground, looking up. So so that has an impact as well. But when they actually, the religious authorities actually saw it, they said it's too good. Right. So they put it in the square.
Oh, okay.
But again, it's out from a block of marble. Now we know Michelangelo, we know his name as a sculptor. Bernini, we know these Roman guys. There are some exceptions. There are some names we know occasionally, but most of the time we have no idea. And what the Romans do, which the Greeks didn't really, what the Romans do is they give personality to the faces. So you can, and I did this for I, Caesar, you can line up all the emperors, their busts, because okay, that's Julius Caesar because he looks like that. That's Hadrian because he looks like that. Their hair, their beards, their noses, these things, so they're identifiable.
Yeah, didn't they put all the wrinkles in, all the blemishes? And then, I was reading about this one, that Augustus was quite, not vain necessarily, but just wanted to make sure that he was quite image conscious. So on this one, they've kept him looking quite young, that even they think he was probably about 40 when they did it. He looks quite good, doesn't he, in fairness? Okay,
so the reality is, think of some of the awful autocratic leaders that we live under. Putin, for example, who I think is the most awful human being. He would be very happy to have himself portrayed like this. And indeed, when you see those shots of him riding bareback on horses and stuff, he's in the same tradition. It's all propaganda. Now, we have we have photographs and film. The Romans didn't have that. 99.9% of what was a much smaller population of the Roman Empire than it is today, far smaller, but they would never see their emperor. So basically, you can present yourself how you like. He's presenting himself, for one thing, he's presenting himself in armour. So this is, he's strong, he's very... Who wouldn't want to, somebody like this who's like pointing the way?
Yeah.
He's strong, he's tough, he's healthy, slightly furrowed brow, good head of hair. Basically, this is a really strong leader that you're happy to be led by. What is the reality? Well, we have some fantastic writers that were working at this time who wrote histories.
Yeah.
You have to be a bit cautious. I remember my researcher on I, Caesar saying, you have to think of them as being, writing for the Sun.
Okay, yeah, okay.
They're actually being quite salacious, or sometimes they're deliberately, if you've got a new emperor, then they're writing very poorly about the past emperor, and they're making up all sorts of stories. And
okay, they don't want to upset him.
Don't take it for granted that what they're saying is true, but there is a description of Augustus, and he's not like this. He wore high heels or elevated shoes because he was short and he was embarrassed by that. He had poor teeth. He was kind of slightly bent forwards. His image basically stays the same even though he lives till his 70s.
Right, okay.
He was actually, in many ways, a very good emperor, and
was he quite well liked?
He was well liked, and unfortunately, the Caesars that follow him were not as good, and the wealth that they had, they just went off. They just went insane. Caligula, Nero actually wasn't quite as bad as we think, but still,
because it was quite a lot of peace around with Augustus? It wasn't quite so much, not so many wars.
Well, it was a very brutal time. And one of the things that I did make sure I got across in my film is that these are not, these were brutal times. Julius Caesar starts his history of the Gallic campaigns by basically saying 1 million Gauls were killed. 1 million. You think, it's probably half the population.
Yeah.
Now, in the ancient world, they use big numbers to indicate a big number.
Right, yeah.
It doesn't mean it's 1 million, it just means we killed a lot. But there was slaughter. And, you were really encouraged to become part of the Roman Empire because... And the Romans were very clever. They said, look, you can keep your religious gods. You can now have... Like when they came to Britain, they would say to the rulers of Britain, you can have some of the... we'll show you all these nice villas with their pools and these are some of the advantages of being Roman. We just ask you to be loyal to the Roman Empire. Divide and rule. Same thing that the British did in India, the local Maharajas and so on and so forth. But if you were to upset them, then the legions would come in and you'd be decimated. It was brutal.
Right, yeah.
And they had slavery, and that was awful. And, of course, there's plenty of examples of... we know about the people get slightly excited by gladiators, but what a brutal, disgusting sport.
Yeah.
And then, Christians being crucified on the cross, and Nero reputedly once had the Appian Way lit by burning Christians on crosses, at night. I mean, we've got to remember this was a really horrible time.
Maybe that's why I do go with geography then. Now you've changed my mind now.
Something much more peaceful about an oxbow or
exactly.
I know.
I'm not sure about what. Now you've put me right off.
But it is absolutely fascinating that you've got this little town in fact, it is Augustus that creates the sense of Italy, but he uses the term Italia. You don't really have a unified Italy for almost another, 1600 years or longer. But they expand, and they're expanding really initially through military force, but then they're very good at ruling. And there's lots and lots of stories. I mean, the Romans invented, they make great use of concrete. I've always wanted to, you'd never get it commissioned now, but there was a time I wanted to make a film about why concrete was so important to the Romans. They'd conquer somewhere and they'd build in concrete, which is, if you go to Rome today, the Pantheon, which was until the Paris Opera was built, the biggest dome in the world, built of concrete.
See, I think that'd be a great thing to watch.
Almost 2,000 years ago, and it's still, our schools are falling apart. They were built 50 years ago.
I think that'd be great to watch. I'd love that film.
Some of these Roman roads are in better state of repair than our roads.
Don't get anyone started on the roads.
All right, let's not go pot.
You've gone crazy now.
If I mention potholes, we're going viral. So this is propaganda.
Yeah.
And there's no accident in the way that it ends up in the Vatican, because the Vatican is all about propaganda. The Roman emperors, we've talked about this before, the Roman emperors wore purple. It's not a coincidence that the popes wear purple. I mean, the popes are the inheritors of the emperors. And you had the Holy Roman Empire, and I'm sure that most popes have had, if maybe their portraits painted, but I'm sure plenty of them have had their statues done, and they all will have been presented in a certain way.
But I thought I've got written down, whether this is true or not, as I always say, that he was the highest priest of the Roman Empire at the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which would have been, as well as everything else he was.
I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing how they ruled.
Yeah.
And when you think that the fastest, messages could only go the speed of a horse. Nothing went faster than a horse.
No.
So they would have it organised so that you could get on a horse, and that horse would ride full speed for, I don't know, I'm guessing here, 20 miles. Then they got the next horse. But still, trying to get a message to a legion out in the south coast of Spain is going to take some time. But and yet it was remarkable how well it ran. You could go. I mean, I did when I was doing I Caesar. You've got these Roman towns in what is now the north of Tunisia, southern Spain, Jordan, the heart of Syria, Turkey, Bulgaria, England. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And they're all being run, the aristocracy, the nobility of these towns were very similar. The nobility of a town like Ithaca in southern Spain could mix with the nobility of a town like Palmyra in Syria. And the travel was probably easier than it's ever been. I'll give you another example. I mean, I love Roman history.
See, it's great. I knew when you said it. I thought, Phil's gone. He's got his books out.
But I mean, we went to a Roman city that was ruined in Tunisia, quite a long way south from the coast. The thing about the Roman Empire in North Africa is that when they were defeated and they left, the peoples who lived there were largely nomadic. Mm-hmm. So they weren't living in cities, they were kind of travelling around. So the cities were essentially abandoned. In Europe, it's slightly different. The Roman cities tended to be built on rivers, which were sensible places for them to be. So when the Romans left, somebody else came in and things get rebuilt and built on and destroyed and rebuilt and so on and so forth. North Africa, many of these cities just get covered in sand. Mm. And then when they're uncovered, Lepsis Magna in Libya is a great example. When they're uncovered from the sand, you've gone back 2,000 years or 1,500 years, and it's remarkable what's there. It's better in a sense than Pompeii or Herculaneum, which in themselves are wonderful places to visit to get a sense of what Roman life was like. But this particular city in Tunisia was a bit of a wreck. We went to visit it. And what you could see a lot on the ground in bits and pieces was like marble veneers.
Right.
And basically, jumping forward in the story a little bit, if one of these nobles was designing their villa, and there'd be a salesman there who would basically have examples of all these different coloured veneers, and he'd be saying, okay, on that wall, do you want this colour green, or that colour purple, or this colour orange, or that colour blue, or what do you want? Marble, as I understand it, is very specific to a specific quarry. Mm-hmm. So there's like fingerprints. So that if you see a particular green, somebody would tell you that comes from that quarry in Cappadocia or whatever in Greece or Turkey. So you can imagine that he's ordering it. That quarry, that marble has to be quarried, sent to a central, could be Ostia, the port of Rome, sent to a central warehousing system. Yeah. Stored, the purchase order has to come in. Just the right amount has to be prepared, and it has to get on a ship, has to get to the coast, has to come down on a horse and cart and turn up on time at this villa. I mean,
that's
quite extraordinary, isn't it?
When you start saying that, it is actually
amazing.
No, 100%.
And so 100%. Let's getting back to the statue.
Yes.
What's so interesting about the statue, of course, is that you never saw your emperor.
No.
So you're living in these towns and cities around, imagine you're up in Hadrian's Wall, so up near what's up there, Carlisle, not Carlisle, anyway, up northern Britain.
Okay.
Or you're living southern Spain, wherever you're living, you've heard that there's a new emperor. You've no idea what he looks like.
No.
You've only three ways of ever knowing what your emperor looks like. One is because he visits. Mm-hmm. Very, very unlikely.
Yep.
Might happen. Hadrian did some travelling. Augustus rarely left. Once he was established in Rome, he didn't leave very often. Two, coins.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So the same with coins. So again, the face on the coin will match the statues. So if you find a coin, even before you see the date, you'll know if it's got short curly hair and a big bushy beard and it looks a certain way, that's Hadrian.
Yeah.
And the coins are circulating. Again, coinage is a fascinating subject, but basically one of the ways you might get some sense of what your emperor looks like is through coinage. And the other way, which is really important, was through statues. Now, as I understand it, what happens with these statues is that you've got a job lot of them get made. You've got factory sculptors
Yeah.
producing copies of it's like a statue like this. So you have the master craftsman producing this, and then copies are made. And when the legions go out, or the legions either go into new territory, or they're going to change, you might have to replacing some old soldiers with new soldiers, they'll take a statue.
Right.
And you can pretty well bet that in every town and city in the Roman Empire, you've got a statue of your emperor. So again, that's why the propaganda works, because people think that's our Augustus.
That's actually funny you saying that, because you sort of think that statues would have come afterwards, so it's interesting.
Yeah,
Of course, they took a statue with them.
They took a statue with them and they plonked it in the middle and said, "This is your emperor. Look how strong and gorgeous he is. Look how he's smart. He's pointing the way to the future."
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned before we started that you'd done some research.
Oh, I just looked at the
what's
breastplate.
on the breastplate.
Yeah. Only because it seemed to tell a story.
What does it say? I actually don't know.
I mean, there's so much. There's so much on there. The two shoulder plates are the Sphinx. There's the Sphinx on there, which they think is linked to Mark Antony and the Cleopatra part.
Who he fights and who kill themselves in Egypt, yeah?
Yes.
Battle of Actium,
then you
very famous
come
battle.
down, you've got some gods.
Yeah.
God of the sky, then you've got God of the sun, Sol.
Oh, yeah.
Luna, Aurora. Then you come down again, and one of the interesting pieces on the middle part of the plate is there's a man passing up a military standard.
Oh, yeah.
Which they think represents the return of the standard from the Parthians.
Okay.
Because they were defeated, and he actually negotiated peace instead of fighting. So they returned the Roman standards back. And then underneath, I don't know, the lower region is more gods. But the fascinating thing, I wondered if you don't know who, because right at the bottom of the statue is Cupid. I don't know if we can see there.
Oh, yeah.
At the very, very, who is, because apparently he tried to link him and Caesar back to gods, so that they say they came from, or were lineage back to the gods.
Do we know why that's Cupid?
Why is that Cupid?
Yeah.
Okay, I've got my
of
paper number 6, Phil.
I don't immediately see an arrow or anything.
Oh, no, that's a point. Well, he's riding a dolphin, and, Venus was born from the sea. But they basically was saying that he goes right back to Romulus and Remus, and here we are. Aeneas. I don't know. Aeneas, that's it, sorry. Okay. Yeah, son of Venus. Oh, nice. And then Romulus and Remus was son of Mars.
The god of war, okay.
And then together, they have Cupid.
This is amazing. It's just at the bottom also it says, this was done in year 18. I mean, Jesus Christ is still alive at this point.
It's so mad.
When this person's carving this, somebody's in... Well, he's quite young at this point, isn't he? If he dies in AD...
I don't know, but you're still going... It's just fascinating to me, that work of art. That is, to me, the work... back there, like you say, year 18, that is...
Well, look at the legs.
Stunning, yeah.
And look at carving those toes.
And the muscles.
I mean, there must be some reason as well why he's got one leg back. I mean, actually, those legs look so realistic.
Is it because he's walking forward, maybe?
I guess it's giving movement, giving dynamism.
Yeah. It's just...
It's staggering, isn't it,
yeah.
really? And again, like we always... It's just, it's easy to go to a museum and wander past the statues.
I would have walked past that.
But actually...
For sure.
You stand and you look. And I always find statues... when you give them the time of day, extraordinary because of this whole thing that this is... I mean, if this was a painting, you'd be impressed.
Oh, yeah.
But this is carved from probably, I don't know for sure, but probably one block of marble. But
they didn't... You think of the tools they had back then. Their tools wouldn't be like necessarily...
One has to assume they had good enough tools. I mean, they had...
Well, clearly they had some
I mean,
pretty good tools.
I mean, look at the calves and the knee.
Everything about it is fascinating.
It's absolutely extraordinary.
I feel like you should bring it up at a dinner party if you know a little bit about it. Because I had a conversation with someone yesterday, and we'd never spoken about anything like this before. It turns out that, he knew quite a lot more than we thought we did, sort of thing. We both did. We ended up having a good old conversation. It was lovely. So...
We said this before. We should history should have been taught through art.
Oh, honestly, Phil.
This is
in 2 days I had 6 pages of notes, but I have not an in-depth knowledge, but something that I could say, yeah, okay, I know a little bit now.
Well, there's plenty of places around Sussex that we can visit. Roman villas. Nice one. Well, you usually have to queue. But if you are in Rome, the Vatican does have the most extraordinary collection, the Vatican Museum, that is. And as I said, I, Caesar, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire is available as a series through 7th-art.com or as a book to listen to or read. Great Commanders is another book of mine, another series, and there's an interesting episode there just about Julius Caesar. We also made another film about the Romans with Terry Jones of Monty Python called The Hidden History of Rome, where you see what life was like from the perspective of a slave. It is easy with the Romans to always focus on the nobility and on the emperors. Actually, pretty rough at the bottom of the scale. And Terry Jones, as ever, was very erudite and entertaining at the same time.
Brilliant.
And that's it for this week's Painting of the Week. If you have enjoyed this week's episode or any of our episodes, please do tell your friends. Like us and share us as best you can. And we'll see you or talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Painting of the Week podcast. For more information, please visit our website at 7th-art.com or contact us by emailing info@7th-art.com. See you next time.